If you're like me, you've probably struggled with inspiration or a lack of ideas from time to time. Or maybe you have a great idea, but you've had a hard time translating that idea into reality. As I take you through the creative process I used to create this recent painting of pearls and butterflies, I hope to spark your imagination and provide you with some new ideas, and at the very least, give you a few helpful tips for painting with acrylics. Hopefully, you'll gain new insights that you can apply to your own creative pursuits. The idea for this specific painting came to me as I observed firsthand the dedication and hard work of a nursing staff at a local children's hospital. I watched their tireless and selfless efforts working around the clock to provide exceptional care for their young patients. Their unwavering dedication, compassion, and professionalism is truly remarkable and inspiring. One night I noticed this butterfly-themed elevator, and that stirred my imagination. In a very tired state of mind, I envisioned a scene of butterflies carrying or visiting pearls in the sky. These two subjects combined and became a representation to me of the relationship and interaction between the nurses and patients. In that moment, I decided to create a painting, just a small token of my appreciation for the amazing care they provided my family. So the first thing I do when I have a decent idea is I start sketching it. And by sketching it, I mean sketching it. I do not try to make a perfect sketch. My sketchbook is really just a place to capture quick ideas, very loose. I'm trying to get something on paper as fast as I can without worrying about how it looks and if someone's done it before, if it's a good idea or anything. That wasn't always the case, but these days that's pretty much my approach. It just so happens that earlier in the summer I had taken lots of photographs of butterflies in our garden. As soon as I got home, looked through all of them and picked out a few to reference for this painting. Initially, I had planned to paint this painting on a small wooden panel that I'd already painted with a green, stormy, dramatic background. So with that green background in mind, I did a quick mock-up in Photoshop, but then I didn't really like the way it looked on green. So I decided to start fresh on a new 8x8 birch panel. This one here is already gessoed. Sometimes I'll gesso on top of these, add an additional layer and sand it, but this one was pretty smooth, so I decided to just work right directly onto the panel. I have a little bit of slow dry medium here and a variety of colors, some yellow ochre, alizarin crimson, titanium white, and I think maybe a little bit of Payne's gray. Put a little of the slow dry medium on the panel as well as in the paint, and my goal here is to just keep the paint open a little bit longer than it usually would be with acrylic paint. It dries really fast, long enough for me to just put down a variety of colors and then blend them pretty quickly with a larger brush. This technique works pretty well. You just have to play with it to get the right viscosity, and if it doesn't turn out the way you want it to the first time, just let it dry and cover it up. Then I took my mock-up and with a piece of Sorrel transfer paper, a quick trace of my layout, not trying to get too many details, just really trying to get the outlines of the big shapes. In fact, I have a lot of smaller butterfly silhouettes in the background, and I don't think I even traced those. I think I just did the big areas, and here I'm going back. Usually start background to foreground, so I'm putting in some of the most distant butterflies first. So I'm just using yellow ochre here and trying to make the butterflies have different angles and not just be the same flat silhouette every single time. I'm also trying to vary the value of the butterflies so that some of them appear more distant. So next I'm going to start working on the pearls because they're the next thing in the foreground, and I need to put them down before I can add some of the butterflies on top of them. Usually when I start with a new area like this, I'll block it in with a flat color or a somewhat flat color, in this case sort of a light to medium blue. And for the next bit here, I'm really just experimenting with different colors and blending them together to try to mimic what these pearls look like. I'm not necessarily copying them, I'm just using them for reference and trying to capture that feeling of what they look like. The main technique that I'm going to use is to take two brushes, one to apply the paint and then another one to blend it into the previous layers. And mainly I do that around the edges. So like here, I'll lay down a little bit of paint near the edge of the pearl, and then I will blend the edges of that paint into the previous layer and just keep doing that one on top of the other with various colors until I get a feeling, or just until it looks good, basically. And that's a technique that I use a lot, and that's also a philosophy I use a lot. I don't know if that's something that other artists do. It's not easy to explain what that means, but I basically just keep working on something until it looks like the image that I have in my mind, or the reference that I'm using, or if I know it's as good as I can do with my current skills. And one more thought about the color choices here as you see the rest of these pearls come together. I'm thinking about trying to paint the color of the object itself, but I'm also thinking about some of the colors that might be reflected from the surrounding environment. And like with lots of natural objects, there's plenty of room for interpretation, so you can be a little bit loose with this. You don't have to try to be perfect. Just like when you're painting trees or grass or leaves or whatever, you're not going to be able to capture every single one of those the same way you would with a camera, and you don't need to, right? You just need to sort of suggest what's there very like impressionistically. So it's not necessarily as easy as a step-by-step process. I just have these general concepts in mind and these techniques that I use, and then I just alternate using them, right? So color, I might start with a medium tone and then lay down the dark and then add some highlights, but then I might reverse that process depending on the subject matter, or I just may go back and forth. Like with these pearls, you'll see sometimes I'll do a dark color and then a light and then another dark color and then a glaze, and I just keep repeating those steps until I'm happy with it. And in some cases like this, where there's multiple objects of the same subject, I might find that 2 or 3 of these turn out better, so I might go back to the first ones I did and rework them. And I think the biggest point I would like to add to all of this is you just have to trust that process. In the middle of painting things like this, it can be frustrating. You can get anxiety over these things, and you can start to worry, and you just have to trust that it's going to keep getting better if you push through. So now I'm going to move on to the butterflies, and I'm going to start with the top right corner. I think this is either a monarch or a false monarch. And I'm starting with quinacridone nickel azo gold. It's a really awesome color. It's a semi-transparent paint. And that's okay with this butterfly because the background behind it is already a warm, uniform color, and there's not a complicated background or other colors behind it. If I needed to, I would have mixed white to make it more opaque, but in this case it was fine. This color is very similar to some of the colors that are in the painted lady butterflies, so as you can see here, I don't like to waste paint, so I'm just kind of bouncing around and putting some paint of the same type in both places, in both butterflies. And similar to the pearls, the next thing I do is just start adding some details. I have a tendency to try to make things too perfect, or at least I have in the past, and try to match things perfectly when I'm doing realistic painting. And even when I'm painting this here, I'm sort of telling myself to loosen up. Don't stress about trying to make every element be the same size and shape and color and line up perfectly, and just do your best to capture the feeling. And in some cases, I think it turns out even better when you can just loosen up and not try to copy something perfectly, but just try to, again, capture that emotion or that feeling or just that impression of whatever you're painting. I'm not sure if this seems like something that's easy to do or not, but it turned out to me to be a lot easier than I thought it would be. It's pretty easy to capture that likeness, I guess, of a butterfly or an insect with very little paint, actually, just a few layers. And I'm sure if I continue to work on these and continue to push myself, I'll end up getting even better at it. So I'm working on the tiger swallowtail now, and the only real point I'd make with the background here is that I'm not using a single flat color. I'm not just using one color, like one yellow. I have like lemon yellow and Indian yellow, and or a couple different varieties there, and I just wanted to give it a little variation, not just have it be one single flat hue. This is a pretty easy subject to paint. It's really just the yellow background and the black details on the wings, and I use those shapes basically as like landmarks, right? So I just pick one area to start with that seems fairly simple to paint, and once I get that part of the black on to the wing, I can then use it as reference to add in all the other related shapes. I was really happy with how the painting was going at this point, and looking forward to moving on to the last two butterflies. So this little part here is probably one of the hardest and most frustrating parts, was trying to paint these antennae and legs. I had to get the thinnest, pointiest brush I had and just go for it. I don't know why, but it was really nerve-wracking, and ended up trying it several times on a smaller piece of paper before I actually did it on the wooden panel, and knowing I could wipe it off really quickly if I didn't like the way it looked, and just keep going. So before I add the last two butterflies, I have to go back and add in the pearls that they will be sitting on or flying over. And nothing special here, just wanted to try to mimic the pearls that were already there, but used maybe a little different color. I think I used some green gold on these, just to give it again some variety and mix it up a little bit. So this butterfly here in the left corner is a painted lady butterfly, and this one turned out to be my favorite, but it's also probably one of the bigger points I want to make with this video, which is you cannot be afraid to just start over or cover up something if it's not quite right. In this case, I painted this butterfly twice. I'm not sure what happened. I'm not sure if it was because there was so many details in the wings and so many intricate parts, but I got really caught up in trying to make it perfect, and it probably honestly would have been completely fine. I know that people see your art, my art, differently than I see it, and it's something that, I don't know, sometimes I think it can serve you well to just let things go and let them be what they are. But I also think that sometimes it's okay to start over, or to redo something. And I will say that without fail, almost every time that I have decided to paint something over or redo it, if you will, it turns out better. So it's almost like the first one was practice, and there was just something about it that wasn't quite right. I think it was primarily the color. I didn't think the colors were popping as much as I'd like. The warm colors, so like the pinks and oranges that are in the middle of the wing, just weren't quite doing it for me. And so I made the call to start over, and it turned out way better, in my opinion. So we're going to be finishing up here in the right corner with this tiger swallowtail. It's a different variety than the yellow one. Both are beautiful butterflies that we have here in Georgia, and I'm sure they're all throughout the Southeast. Main point I want to make here with this one is that I'm not using a true black. I'm just using like raw umber, burnt umber, the nickel again, and a variety of dark colors. There's not a lot technically here that's different than the other butterflies, right? It's the same process, just using different colors. At this point, I wasn't quite sure I was going to add the reflections on the pearls. I was considering it, but after a short conversation with my buddy Brendan Benson, he basically said, "You're not the kind of person I think that wants to make comfortable art," and so that really shook me out of my comfort zone, frankly, and gave me the courage to go ahead and add the reflections. And I know it might seem silly, but we do get caught up in those things. As we're making art, we find that they're good enough or better than we expected, and so sometimes we're a little more hesitant to really push them forward. So I'm really happy I did. I do want to mention though here that I'm not quite sure with my audience, how many of you are really experienced in a painting and acrylic painting, and how many of you might just be starting out. So that's why I'd love to hear in the comments, below, like what you guys are looking for, what you might have found helpful, what you're looking to learn. I'm always looking at ways that I can improve. not only as an artist, but also obviously as a content creator. And so your feedback and ideas and communication are greatly appreciated. I couldn't be happier with how this painting turned out. If you're interested in a print of this piece, I do have them available. You can get one on my website with the link in the description. I was super excited to give it as a gift to the nurses at the hospital that I mentioned before. They seemed very pleased with it, and I'm hoping that it brightens someone's day there at the hospital. I'm also going to show here how I end up finishing my paintings. I do an isolation coat, clear coat, and then on top of that I do either a satin or a gloss varnish depending on the subject matter and the size of the work. This is how this painting turned out. Again, I'm thrilled with how it came out. As far as things that I could have done differently or done better, I think in the future when I do one of these, I'll try to make it even more abstract and try to create more motion in the butterflies. I'll have more of the butterflies going off the edges and not have them sort of like forced into the square, if that makes any sense. So probably play with the composition and play with the style a little bit to make it a little more dynamic. Thank you for watching. As always, I really appreciate all your comments and support. Hopefully you guys will take something from this. I'd love to hear if this has been something that is encouraging you to make your art more interesting, or if you learned anything at all. Let me know. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.